Rowan.
Good morning, David. Could you put yourself on mute, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Susan, that note from Hannah is indicating that she...
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, can you see that note on the chat?
Yeah, it's all right. I can now. Yep, got you. Give us, right, yep. So, yes, I'm all ready to go. Okay, so good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Finance and Audit Committee meeting of the 23rd of March. First up, I'd just like to explain that the meeting is being recorded and will be live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel, and all participants are to keep the cameras turned on and microphones muted unless you're addressing the meeting. Councillors, please use the hands up function so I can see if you'd like to ask a question, and I'll go through the order that they're raised. And please text the amendment, email any amendments you have to the committee administrator. So that's okay. We don't have to do any health and safety, so just check your own health and safety in your own premises, please. So we now move on to apologies. Oh, just before apologies, what I intend to do, we've got a briefing at 1 o'clock, so we will adjourn for lunch at 12. So lunch will be at 12 to 1, and I will endeavour to break between 10:15 and 10:30 for morning tea. So I'll try for that time. So that gives you an indication of the breaks. Right. So I'll now move to apologies, and I have the Mayor on early departure and Council Meehan as an apology. Councillor Finlay.
Apologies for early departure. I will come back later on after lunch, but it could be a bit late.
Okay, that's noted. Thank you, Councillor. Are there any...
Sorry, Chair, there's conflicts. Oh, sorry.
I haven't got there yet, Councillor. So we're now on the apologies. So I now move that the apologies be accepted. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, the Deputy Mayor. Right, and all those in favour would just go, I think it's easier to go with the voices. No, it's not. It's easy to go with your hands. Sorry. So if you just raise your hand, all those in favour. Aye. Okay. Is anybody against? And any abstentions? Okay. No, we're fine. So that is carried. Right. We'll just move on now. Is there any notification of any additional items? No, there isn't. Just one moment. This is just a little bit slower because I have to go click from chat to people to check. Can you make sure that your screens are on, because I can't see you if you haven't got your screen turned on. So, okay, thank you. Right, now I'm not aware of any public comment. So we'll move on now. Confirmation of the minutes. Hang on just 1 minute.
Actually, Madam Chair, Councillor Dennison, I've got a conflict I wanted to declare before you.
Yes, sorry, just 1 moment. I've just realised on the agenda that it's missing. Okay, so we'll now move to any conflicts of interest. So first up we had Councillor Mickelard. You had a conflict of interest?
Oh, no, I was just speaking on behalf of Councillor Dennison, who couldn't look at his message because we're in the same room.
Okay, right. Councillor Dennison?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I want to declare my interest in item 13, which is the lease for Calvin Park, as I'm the patron for Manawatu Softball Association.
Okay, that's noted, Councillor. Okay, so there's no more conflicts. Right, we'll now go to the confirmation of the minutes. And I'm now going to move the minutes of the 23rd of February, part 1, and I'm also going to move the minutes of the 23rd of February, part 2, confidential. So if there's anyone needs to comment on part 2, we will need to go into part 2. So unless I think we're all okay with that. So can I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Any comments? And we'll now go to vote. So all those in favour, please raise your hand. Anyone against? And any abstentions? Okay, so that is carried. Right, we now move on to item number 6, and that's the Palmerston North Airport interim report for 6 months up to the 31st of December. This will be presented by Steve Patterson, our Strategy Manager of Finance, and we have Murray Georgell, the Chair of Palmerston North Airport, and David Lanham, the Chief Executive of the Palmerston North Airport, and we also have in attendance is Jonathan Baker, the Finance Manager for the Palmerston North Airport. So I will hand over to you, Steve, first. Steve Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This report is one of two. The first one's about the 6 months and the following one's about the statement of intent. So we'll handle them separately. And from my perspective, I don't have anything particular to draw to your attention about the first 6 months of the company's performance. I know that they've got a presentation they'll make to us, and so perhaps best in terms of time that we allow them to do that. And if I've got any thoughts after that, I'll come back.
Okay then, thank you very much. So I will hand over to the Palmerston North Airport. So that's David and Murray. So when you're ready, gentlemen.
Oh yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I've got very, very little to say about the last 6 months other than it's the continuation of some disruption. We have, however, continued to maintain a compliant and safe environment and kept our attention on our priorities, which are very much around airside infrastructure, then landside, and then, of course, where we can, our commercial interests in terms of Ruapehu Business Park. I think the figures will speak for themselves, and David Lanham will present the results for those 6 months.
Okay.
Thanks, Murray. Thanks, Madam Chair. Tēnā koutou katoa. I will try and share my screen now. Apologies for my slowness at this.
No, that's okay.
Okay, I'll move that away. Oops. Can everybody see the screen, the presentation?
Yes.
Yes, great. Okay. So as Murray mentioned, really it was in summary, H1 was a period impacted significantly by the Delta strain of COVID-19 and Auckland lockdowns, which both impacted passenger volumes and then, of course, ultimately financial performance. So I'll now go into a little bit more detail about those things, but I'll start with the highlights. Safety continues to be our primary focus here, of course, above everything else. And so we continue to maintain our zero lost time injury performance. We received our first annual audit of our safety management system, which has now been in place for about 16 months. That was a successful audit. And we also engaged with our aerodrome community through an anonymous safety culture survey, and that came back with some very positive results as well. We continue to maintain civil aviation compliance, and one of the major projects, I guess, from a personnel perspective was the insourcing of the rescue fire team, which was previously a third-party contractor. So that all happened around September. In terms of our sustainability journey, we were accredited at level 2 of the Airport Carbon Accreditation Program in December, and I'll talk a bit later about where we're going next, jumping to level 4. We engaged Studio Pacific to commence the design of our terminal development. You'll appreciate that project has been on hold for a couple of years, but we have now made progress, and Studio Pacific will be commencing design work in April. And for all those that have been out to the airport, you'll note that Wairaka Place Stage 1 is nearing completion. We are close to getting the landscaping done now that the weather's turning a little bit more moderate. And so we're hoping to take down our fencing, etc. very, very soon. And you'll see 2 developments pop up pretty quickly there. But as we said, there's no escaping the impact of Delta. Auckland route was a significant loss for us from August through to mid-December. We were lucky that Air New Zealand boosted capacity on Christchurch, and so we made up a small amount of passenger numbers on the Christchurch route. But we were still 39% below the SOI. So instead of a budget of something like 230,000 passengers, we hit 140,000, so we were 90,000 passengers down. And that, of course, flowed through to aeronautical income and all the other associated income lines, including car parking, spend in cafe, etc. So as you can see, the bottom line there, 90% decline from our aeronautical-related income sources. So what do we do about that? From a cost perspective, we obviously went back to the drawing board and had a good hard look at all of our CapEx and OpEx and pretty much deferred all of the non-essential works. That included approximately $600,000 runway treatment, which is a maintenance line, it's not a CapEx line, and that has been deferred until next year now. It doesn't place us at any risk. We did progress with just recently with runway end overlays. Those were urgent works, so we are prioritising urgent over non-essential. In all, we managed to save, I think, something around $600,000 in expenses. Sorry, a bit more than that, 850. 600 of that being that runway treatment and about 250 from other cost lines. So in terms of the full year, we're now dealing, of course, with Omicron. We're all well aware of what the media is talking about at the moment with Omicron. Are we over the peak? Are we not? But for us, business continuity is paramount, of course. So our pandemic response plan has been focused on keeping our team safe and keeping this airport running. So all non-essential workers are, a bit like council, working remotely. It's only our critical teams that are here. And in terms of our super critical team, our rescue fire personnel, they are all isolating themselves on each shift. There's no crossover of people, and they're all undertaking RAT tests on a daily basis before coming into work. Looking ahead for the full year, Feb was down 30% in passenger volumes, 45% below the SOI, and March is also significantly lower. We're still hoping that there's a small bounce back in April, but that'll remain to be seen. But I guess the telling number here for everyone is that we're now predicting something like 314,000 passengers for the full year. We haven't seen that low level of passenger numbers since 2002. So it's a significant jump backwards, if you like. And if you think pre-COVID, those heady days, with Jetstar here, we got up to 680 odd thousand. So we're well below half of what we achieved just 2.5 years ago. In financial terms, that means we're looking now at a net surplus of around $580,000. And as we've mentioned before, our focus is on retaining capital in the business and investing it into long-term assets such as Wairaka Place and, of course, the terminal itself, which ultimately benefits our entire community. I'll stop there and turn off sharing if I can. Has that turned off, folks?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Shall I hand back to Steve?
Yes, we'll just go back to Steve, and then we'll check for any questions. Actually, before we go back to Steve, I think we'll just go to questions. It saves. Is there anything you wish to add, Steve?
No, Madam Chair, it's fine the way it is.
Okay, thank you. So we'll now go to questions. So first up, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I was second in line, but that's fine. Yeah, thanks, David. Thanks, Murray. The rescue fire team and pulling that in. Have other airports done that as well? I realise it was third party. We're in the second year of that now, are we?
We insourced them at the end of September. So we're about 6 months into that grant. Look, it's a mixed bag across the country. I think it's fair to say many of the regional airports are now looking at insourcing, those that haven't already. And it really comes down to control and that whole focus on safety. We have had our incidents, as you'd appreciate, with PFAS a few years ago, and that really triggered a close look at how we manage rescue fire. Hence, ultimately, we insourced. And again, you see it at other regionals now too. Hawke's Bay did it about 1.5 years ago, and there's a few others that are considering it.
And what's the rough cost of that? Because it's obviously pretty capital intensive, isn't it, when you start with basically fire engines and everything else?
That's right. So we've purchased the 2 refurbished Rosenbauer Panthers from Singapore. So that's cost us about just over $1 million for those 2 appliances. In terms of operational costs, though, keeping the RFS ops running, it's pretty much line ball with what it was when it was a third-party contractor. But it's just that capital investment in the trucks.
And Madam Chair, just a couple more. So what, and I know this is very operational, but what, we obviously have staff on every time there's a landing with this. What do those people do? Do they, in downtime, do they continually just train, or is there other duties that they partake in?
Yeah, so they're very active right around the airfield. So wildlife management is a big part of their role. So keeping birds away, checking fence lines. There's a range of things. There's maintenance on the trucks. They're pretty busy when they're on shift.
And one final question, Madam Chair. So, David, you mentioned the numbers, and they are what they are. I think we accept that you're in a difficult position, as is every airport. And that's my question is, where are we placed with the likes of others? Are we the same? Are we worse off? Are we slightly better off? What's your gut feel on that?
It's a tricky one. Of course, in the first round of COVID, we lost the Wellington route, as you know, in Hamilton. And so we're really one of the only regionals that lost routes, so to speak. So we've just got, of course, Auckland and Christchurch. So we're sort of on the back foot because of the loss of those 2 routes that happened, about 18 months ago. But in terms of the growth of capacity onto Auckland and Christchurch, we're pretty much in line with the other airports. So, in terms of percentage increases, there's no sort of move away, if you like, from Palmerston North. It's still very positive, the relationship, and we've had Air NZ here a couple of times already this year talking about the future. So, no, it's a positive outlook.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Murray and David. I've just got a question around the Wairaka Place development. I guess just in terms of looking back to the original plans for that three-stage development and the interest in, I guess, who the prospective either tenants or buyers were, has that shifted over the last 2 years essentially? And is there still, do you think that the demand for it is still reasonably consistent across all three stages? I guess there's a bit of forecasting there, but yeah, I'd be interested in your comments around what that piece is looking like specifically.
Thanks for the question. The priority at this stage is stage 1, which opens up about 8 lots. Our SOI, which we'll talk about a bit later, obviously talks about deferring stage 2 and 3 at this point until we see how stage 1 rolls. But we have strong demand for Wairaka Place and also at other locations across the airport, particularly from freight and logistics. And so ideally we will start to see more traction in stage 1 once those 2 sites that we did sell come out of the ground. And again, that'll happen in the next few months. There's already equipment there. So once people see the fence down and they see things going up, we're pretty positive that we've got a pretty good, compelling offer. We were located between Te Utanganui and the CBD and right outside the airport.
And just in terms of, I guess, what's happening in your surrounding community with the rail hub, has that, do you see that as a driver in terms of like interest in the development?
Very much so. Obviously there's a bit of a lead time with the Kiwi Rail investment, but Northeastern and us of course are here now, and we're heavily engaged in all of those processes that Dave Murphy etc are running. Absolutely, we're on the southern side of that of Te Utanganui, and we know that we'll benefit from our location because of that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Buck.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, David and Murray. Obviously, my question will be about the ACA and ACI. You can understand that. And firstly, congratulations on getting the second stage of ACA. I'm very happy to read that. On page 10 of your report, you say that you have actually provided some evidence to ACI about the real reduction in carbon footprint as compared to the last year. Is this report or these figures shared on the website, airport website, or in any other separate report?
They haven't been, Councillor, but I'm very happy to ask someone to draft something up for public release.
Okay, I'll be interested in having a look. We might get some new things we might learn some new things from the airport. My second question is, Madam Chair, are we doing any big, obviously this is an achievement. I think it is an achievement. Are we doing something to inform people or publicize this achievement on the airport or anywhere in the media?
Well, from our perspective, we have put out a release through our website and through Facebook. We could look at a wider release, but at this stage we were sort of in line with what other airports tend to do when they're shouting. I think once we get further along to level 4, we'll be the leading regional airport in terms of ACI carbon accreditation. So it's certainly worth a bigger shout then.
Oh, thank you. Good luck for that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, just a question. With the park coming online and the fences going down, what have you done to mitigate the problems that will happen with the boy races?
A very good question, Councillor. obviously we're well aware of what's happened in Valor Drive. It is a concern for us. And that's why we've kept the barriers up as long as we have at the entrance to Wairaka Place. We are looking at additional CCTV cameras with LPR, licence plate recognition, so that we can at least try and be a little bit more proactive when things happen. But we don't know. Obviously, it's an area much closer to the residential boundary than Valor Place, or Valor Drive, sorry. And so we're wondering whether that might put some of these people off. But we know that Airport Drive is used from time to time, and in fact, I think it was last Friday we lost a power pole on Airport Drive to a boy racer. So it's a problem that we're starting to think about, and particularly in terms of Wairaka Place, but we don't have a solution yet.
Have you thought about putting in permanent calming devices or anything like that?
We haven't turned our mind to that yet, but thanks for the prompt. We do need to think more about what can be done. I've obviously seen reference to fencing, etc. at Valor Place Drive. We need to think through what's appropriate for our area.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, are there any more questions? No, there's no hands up. So thank you very much, both of you, for this. We'll keep you online for the next agenda items. So I'll now move that the council receive the interim report and financial statements of the Palmerston North Airport Limited for the period ended the 31st of December 2021, presented to the Finance and Audit Committee on 23rd of March 2022. Have a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Butt. Any comments? I'll just go to my chat box and get the order right this time. I'm in my people box, so there's nobody in the thing. So thank you very much for that result. We know through the COVID that these are hard times. I remember coming on council, when I first came onto council, the airport passenger numbers were increasing round about from just at the end of about 390 to 429. That was in the first SOI I saw 12 years ago. And so to look at the passenger numbers at 319,000, I can see the pain that you're going through. But so well done. So we'll now move on to our next item. And that is item number...
Chair, sorry. Do we need to vote on this item?
Yes, we do. Thank you for keeping me on track. Okay, so we'll now go to vote. So all those in favour, please raise your hand. And anyone against? And any abstentions? Okay, so that is carried unanimously. So now we'll go on to our next item 7. And that is the Palmerston North Airport draft statement of intent for 22-23, and that's on page 33. And that is also presented by Steve Patterson, Strategy Manager for the Council, and we have Murray Georgell and David Langham from the Palmerston North Airport with Jonathan Baker as backup. So over to you, Steve, first. Is there anything?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just very brief introduction once again. As we know as the council, when we're trying to plan, there's certainly uncertain times, and so the same caveats are obviously the things that the airport company's addressing in terms of the way in which they're trying to plan as well. So I know once again that they've got a presentation to make to us to outline the details, so it's probably desirable to listen to that first, and then if there's anything more that pops up following that, I'll make some comments.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Okay, so we'll now move, if we can move to the airport. Just one moment. Yeah, we're just going to that screen. Have we got Murray and David up.
Yes, hello, Madam Chair, we're here. I'm just trying to share the screen.
Thank you.
Is it going? Statement of intent?
No, it isn't, sorry.
Okay. Right, I shall press that again. Just that.
And as he's finding that, Madam Chair, from time to time, as happens at airports, an airplane comes in and makes a noise in the background. I hope that is not too disturbing.
No, we can't hear that noise, so that's fine. Can other councillors see that screen? I'm just checking. Raise your hand if you can see the screen. Okay, I appear to be the only one who can't, so perhaps if you can continue and I'll work out why.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
if you'll allow,
Yes.
have you got large gallery enabled?
Thank you very much, councillor. This is a training exercise. Okay, away we go.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we have some pleasure in providing our draft statement of intent for the financial year 22-23. But we don't give it to you with the absolute confidence that we've done in past years, excluding the last one or two. And this is clearly as a feature of the disruption we've had to date. And, you know, we've talked about some of the numbers, the passenger numbers. We see that there is a reasonably strong response from our major customer here, which is Air New Zealand, in providing their estimates of future travel and the routes, the numbers. So we have some confidence that we've aligned to those, but that doesn't mean to say it will be exactly as is predicted. We're also aware that the social acceptance of travel may be different in the future to what it has been in the past. So with that in mind, we've had to look at this with some caution, but equally some optimism based around those, such as Air New Zealand, who provide us with information of the future, their estimates of it. The end result is that the passage through our terminal and onto airplanes is less than we've had for years, and that has some significant impact on the enterprise. The great things about it, though, is that when we look ahead, we are managing to retain a very health and safe environment on our airside infrastructure, and whilst we have been able to push back some expenditure on that, that hasn't been critical at the time, and we are making sure that everything airside infrastructure that needs to be spent will be spent. Thereafter, we turn our attention to the passenger journey from basically the car park to the through the terminal, and say that we know that the terminal is in need of redevelopment. We've had that for some time. We are looking at the means by which we achieve that. We have got, as David has said, appointed a lead architect, and we will be pursuing that in line with our plans here, which are to seek the local government funding authority funding avenues. When we look at that, we can afford to continue some capital expenditure around our terminal. We've had to make sure that we're very mindful of where that capital goes, retain our capital wherever possible, and hence the reason for the likes of the business park. We are not proceeding with that full-fledged. You know, we've taken stage one and said, let's do that, and when we have the funds available, we'll move to stage two and so on. So we've been very mindful that the fact that capital and cash won't be as abundant as we had planned in the past. Nevertheless, we've got our priorities remain as they are, and we have got plans to to continue to maintain our airside infrastructure and develop our landside infrastructure quite markedly over the next 3 years.
Our slides aren't moving, but I didn't want to interrupt you because it's.
That's perfect, Madam Chair, because we're just moving on to that now.
Okay, great, thank you.
Has that moved, Madam Chair?
Yeah, it has. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Murray, for the introduction there. As Murray said, cautious optimism again is the flavour for us. We have to be optimistic, but equally we know what's happened in the last couple of years, and so we've got to be very cautious of what we do. In saying that, as Murray's alluded to, we've got a significant increase in capital expenditure planned, really ultimately supporting our city goals and our regional growth aspirations. So around Ruapehu Business Park, around our terminal and airside infrastructure. And really, it's quite ironic that the COVID impact has really reinforced why we're investing in Ruapehu Business Park in Wairaka Place, because that revenue diversification is so critical for the long-term success of any airport. Again, as I spoke to earlier with the reference to H1 of the current year, ongoing focus on safety, that's just paramount, that's just every day, it's in our DNA, that does not get moved. And really, we're looking for shareholder support for the full plan. And I know Steve will talk later on about our consideration of LGFA funding via PNCC, which will be a big part of that support. But equally, we're seeking, again, this ongoing support in terms of retention of the capital in the business, investing it back into the terminal, back into Wairaka Place, and back into infrastructure for our long-term benefits. Here's our rocky road. Blue is actual history. Green is our projection. So you might look at that and think, gosh, that's a bit optimistic. Well, again, it could be, but we've engaged with Air New Zealand. We know what they're wanting to do in terms of staging the growth. And so, again, we're cautiously optimistic that we can achieve that sort of level of recovery. So in terms of financial recovery, what are we doing? Well, we've got an aeronautical pricing reset, which is about to kick off with Air New Zealand and our other substantial customers. So we'll be looking at pricing that meets our needs, but equally their needs. Ongoing income diversification. So again, that focus on developing Ruapehu Business Park, particularly design, build and leaseback, not sales, because we recognise that selling land, while it gives you an immediate benefit, it doesn't actually provide you with the long-term benefit that lease income does. Our ongoing focus on cost containment, strong bank relationship. We're very fortunate to have a very supportive relationship with the Bank of New Zealand. And as I alluded to earlier, we'll be looking at LGFA options via Palmerston City. And strategic partnerships, particularly around property development, we're continuing to look at those and hope to make some announcements soon. Key areas of focus, again, safety, again, not negotiable. It's the top of everything we do. Zero harm approach to everyone who works or visits our airport. The ongoing evolution of our safety management system. Ongoing compliance with CAA and other statutory and regulatory obligations. Seismic upgrades as part of the terminal redevelopment. An ongoing focus on our team and well-being. That's been a big part of our success to date too, is keeping our team engaged and happy and motivated, which, as you all would know, it's difficult when everyone's working remotely, but that's going to continue to be a big focus for us. And an even greater focus on understanding our air and ground noise emissions, because we recognise how critical our 24/7 openness is, both for the airport, but equally for the Central New Zealand Distribution Hub, Te Utanganui. It's a critical comparative advantage that we have in our multimodal hub. The terminal development, as Murray mentioned, Studio Pacific are engaged, and they'll be commencing work in April. We had a very positive meeting with Rangatane a week or so ago, and Rangatane are very supportive of the project and are going to be involved right at the concept design phase with three of their designers, if you like, appointed to work alongside Studio Pacific. So we're very excited about what could happen there in terms of where we take that relationship with Rangatane and the wider region, and how we portray our sense of place, building on the legend of Haunui-a Nanaia, which we have here now. In terms of the project cost, we're really at a very early stage. We think it's between 21 and 26 million, but of course, once we get into design, we'll start to get a better feel for that. And of course, within that project, there's going to be some cost refinement gateways. So if we have to reverse engineer any aspects of it because of costs, we will. So we'll keep a close eye on that. So really, ultimately, the terminal redevelopment is about supporting future growth, which might sound ironic at the moment, given where we are, but we are a long-term business, and we have to think about the future. We know, as we've talked to you before about, passenger and hold bag screening at regional airports is likely to come, and so we need to be ready for that. We cannot achieve that properly in this current footprint, and so we really need to make those changes now. And we know that ultimately, if we do those things, it provides us with a platform to talk to Air New Zealand more seriously about the reintroduction of jet services, particularly on Auckland route. Murray alluded to the fact that the journey from the car park to the terminal and through, we recognise the whole customer experience needs to be boosted right from the car park and through the terminal. So that's a big part of this project as well. And as I mentioned, that sense of place and our pride in our airport and our sense of place, we're really looking forward to how that comes out. We want to make it a more efficient building to move around. It has improved in recent years with the last extension, but there's still things that we can do to make it easier for people to navigate, particularly from the car park, looking at the terminal and knowing where the main entrance is. And seismic is a big part of this as well. We've talked about that before, and of course we're going to be looking at how we can factor in sustainable design principles into the design. Other customer initiatives, we're all very, very happy to see our new escalator in. That was a monster of a project, taking about a year from when we first ordered it to when it arrived. The logistics of getting it through the terminal in one piece overnight, one night. And now, thankfully, it's in. There's a couple of small teething problems that you expect with new equipment. They're being fixed as we speak. So that was a major to get that one done. We're looking at improving our signage in our car park. We've recently engaged with Diadem, who are world leaders in signage branding, and so they're going to help us with wayfinding. We've talked before about pick-up drop-off and the desire to put shelters along there. That's still a focus for us as part of the bigger TDP project, if you like, and then ultimately some covered walkways in our car park. We're also looking again at valet, and whether there's a lighter option, maybe less personnel hungry, more around automation. But we recognise that there is a customer segment that really enjoyed that product. So we're going to look at that again. Equally, we need to move quickly on car park technology. So licence plate recognition, etc., are all things that we are looking at closely. And ultimately, that all leads to really getting our Net Promoter Score up. Ongoing airside investment, around $5.5 million in CapEx over the next 3 years, primarily on taxi upgrades and apron areas, which would then support those regular jet services if they were to come back. Ongoing upgrades also of some of our roadways around the airport, and further work on our freight precinct strategy. And and where that could happen. I talked earlier about sustainability and how we're now going to move to level 4. Under level 4, the big benefits for us are working with a business operator within the terminal and helping them or mentoring them on their journey. But equally, we've got some exciting things happening in terms of further reductions in our carbon emissions, and the big one is when we finally turn off our old HVAC system, the significant benefits there in terms of moving away from natural gas, etc. So some more positive steps down in carbon emissions to happen. And in terms of waste, an ongoing focus on diversion of waste from landfill. And as you see there, I think we've achieved a 71% reduction so far. And as I mentioned earlier, if once we do get level 4, and we're targeting getting that by December this year, we will be the leading regional airport in that, in terms of that level. Just quickly, Ruapehu Business Park, Stage 1. I think you've all seen this picture before. The green area is Stage 1, and you'll see the red circles. That represents the couple of lots that we've sold. So 2 sales. We won't sell any more, as I said earlier. Our focus is customised solutions for clients that want a design, build and leaseback option. And so we're working with strategic partners on how best to lay out that area, that Stage 1 area. I talked earlier about income diversification. I won't dwell on that too much, other than to say we're investing or planning to invest around $8 million in design builds over the SOI period. So that's putting facilities into Wairaka Place, but equally other locations at the airport where there's demand. We're also looking at further upgrades to Airport Drive. We've recently completed an upgrade just along from the School of Aviation, and we have around $1.25 million planned for further upgrades where the road is looking in quite bad shape at the moment. This is probably a very small slide, but really, I guess the theme here is that we're looking for an upkick in revenue of, I think it's around 2 million. I can't read it myself now. Costs sort of back to the 21 SOI level. So still really controlling them, but you'll see there is an increase in costs over the current year. And that really is, I would say, because of this runway treatment, which is about a $600,000 maintenance project. That really is one of the key differences in costs between the SOI period, 22-23, and the current year, 21-22. And you'll see that all translates down to a targeted net operating surplus of around $1 million compared to just over 500,000 this year. CapEx, we've talked about the spend starting to happen on the terminal, Wairaka Place and infrastructure, all up approximately 7.8 million in the 22-23 year. And then you'll see the real ramp up as the terminal development project construction really kicks on, with something like 26 million in the second year, and then I think it's 8 million in the third. So some significant CapEx spends coming for the airport company. That's all I have, and happy to take questions, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, David. So first up we have Councillor Johnson. I've got the right screen this time and the order right.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, David and Murray. My question's about the comments you made about the importance of the 24/7 air freight services, and you just sort of touched on the noise, the potential for noise complaint, I suppose. So I wondered, I mean, I see in your report on page 51 of our documents that you're in the process of finalising a process for the ongoing reporting and monitoring of air and noise emissions. I just wondered if you could give us a bit more detail about noise mitigation, I suppose, from the airport's perspective, and whether or not you receive complaints of noise at night.
Thanks for the questions. So we have a noise management plan currently which has been signed off by Palmerston City Council and Manawatu District Council, which very much guides how we manage air noise. So that's noise associated with aircraft that are taking off and landing and flying. We have within the district plan, section 13, the airport zone, air noise contours, which have been promulgated, which provide protection to us for our air services. And so what we've recently introduced is a monitoring regime to understand whether we are compliant with those contours, and if we're not. In terms of ground noise, we're now starting to focus on compliance with district plan requirements around ground noise. So that's any emissions from ground vehicles, machinery, and even aircraft when they're sitting on the ground. And so this is a new journey that we've started on. We have been talking with Marshall Day about helping us with some recordings at key residential boundaries to understand current levels of noise emissions. So we take noise very seriously. We know that we very much value the social licence we have to operate, and so we don't want to risk getting offside with our community. Thankfully, Councillor, we don't have many complaints, although I will say we did have a complaint about 3 weeks ago about the freighter operations, but really I think we've had 3 in 5 years. And I'll put that down to we've had, as you'll know, some unusual wind patterns with southwesterlies, and the way the freighter takes off at night, it's gone on a different flight path, and I think for some people that's a bit unusual.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm quite aware of its route usually. Okay, thank you for that information. That's great. Then is the noise management plan available to us? Is it online somewhere?
Yes, absolutely it is. It's on our website.
Okay, cool. I'll have a look at that. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, David and Murray, again. My question is about, you said 71% of the waste has already been diverted in the last year, and you have some more plans. Can I ask, does that mean only putting that recycling material into recycling bins or disposing it off properly? Because I can understand that council is feeling some problems in disposing of these recycling materials and they are stacking it somewhere. So are you putting it in the council bins and calling it proper disposing, or are you doing something concrete with it?
That's a good question. Oh, look, I'd have to ask my facilities manager exactly there. I know we've worked very closely with the recycling plant in Maxwell's Line. I'd need to get more information for you on that, Councillor.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, Councillor Finlay. Mute, Lou.
Yeah, no, I got it. My mouse is on the other screen. You said that you sold 2 sites in the park. Now, looking at the map we've got, there's lot 19 has been half shaded in with a sold. Yep. Is that a sale or what is that?
Yeah, so it's essentially it's one lot. I know there's 2 little red bubbles there, but that was one sale. So the purchaser of that bigger lot took that slice off the next lot as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the team for the report. Look, I just was hoping to get a little bit more of a flavour around the revenue assumptions, and I noted you said that you'd taken a optimistic or cautiously optimistic approach to passenger numbers, but could you provide perhaps a bit of colour around what might be the upside or the downside to those numbers, and perhaps why we wouldn't be returning to, in the next couple of years, pre-COVID numbers and a growth trajectory which looked quite strong leading into this last couple of years?
Thanks for the question. again, it's a difficult one for us. We've worked closely with Air New Zealand, and let's be honest, they're our primary source of passengers, and so we need to rely on their judgment. It's a tricky one. We're looking at getting over 400,000 passengers in the next financial year. I think our budget for the current year was 480,000, and here we are. We've just been talking about 314,000 that we'll actually achieve. It's a very, very tricky one for us to pick, but ultimately we can only rely on what Air New Zealand tell us, and that's the best estimate we've got. In terms of downside, tricky again, but again, if you look at this current year, 314 versus 480, you can talk about 150,000 passengers possibly. It's just a very, very tricky one to pick.
Okay. All right, look, thanks. I'll leave it at that. Thanks for that answer.
Okay. Councillor Naylor.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, David and Murray. Just one quick question about the dividend, and obviously that's been suspended for a further few years. Just wondering, is that longer than what had originally been intended, or and when would you think it would be appropriate to start reinstating the dividend?
Thank you. Well, it probably has been extended about 1 year in line with the delay in the terminal development plan, such that when you look at our profile into the next 3 years, we peak in our borrowings in 3 years' time. And it's about that stage that we would start to see that the need to retain capital, whilst desirable, isn't absolutely necessary. And if we can maintain when we service that level of debt, and we have diversified some of our revenue flows, we should be in a far better place. So it's at the end of this SOI period.
Okay, and just there was one further question. In terms of the debt that you're taking on for your capital investment, do you have any concerns around the increasing interest rate?
Yes. Yes, nice simple question, and simple answer is yes. However, we have been also looking at what that profile looks like out across the years. Jonathan Baker's been dealing quite detailed basis and has provided us with assumptions to provide us with our SOI. And we have taken account of where the interest rates are now and where they look like they're headed based on today's or, the current assumptions and considerations.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Murray, and thanks, David, for the report on the 6 months past, which I greatly enjoyed, and thanks now for the statement of intent. Just wanted to get a little more understanding around the carbon side of things, and certainly appreciate the transition to level 4 and the intent signaled on page 10 of the SOI around net zero emissions by 2035. What I was wanting to understand is really what is the expectation over the period of this actual statement of intent, the next 12 months, in terms of progress toward that.
Yeah, I don't have those numbers with me, Councillor, but as I mentioned, when we have looked at it previously, the decommissioning of the boiler is going to be a significant step change in CO2 emissions, moving from natural gas to electricity. I don't have those numbers with me, but I'm happy to find those and send them through.
Thanks. So just to clarify, that's intended within the 12 months of the statement of intent?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Great. Thank you. That's helpful. Can I just ask too around that swap out? Is it over the life of the asset going to also deliver a financial benefit as well as an emissions benefit?
I don't know. Yeah, I'd have to check that. I don't know. Certainly the new HVAC obviously has a BMS a management system which is very good, very efficient at maintaining temperature levels, and whereas the old system was very clunky. So from a perspective of the amount of energy that it consumes to maintain temperatures, and that we're certainly going to a more efficient system. But in terms of the actual cost, I don't have that.
Okay, no, that's right. That's fine. Perhaps if next time we have this opportunity, we could get a little more information around that. It'd be quite interesting. Second question that I had, Madam Chair, and the final one was just around, I saw recently media reports around Christchurch Airport doing quite a significant development around renewable energy generation alongside the airport business, and just wondered, A, if you'd seen that, and B, if that had prompted any thinking around opportunities that might exist for the airport company here.
Yes, we have seen it. We're aware of what they're doing, and equally Hawke's Bay Airport in a similar way. We haven't turned our mind to that yet. We were focusing on level 2 and now level 4, but that is the next stage. Obviously, is how we can offset, and so at the appropriate time we'll turn our minds to that.
Okay, thanks, David. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Armstrong, did you wish to ask another question, or is your hand still up? You're on mute, sorry.
No, Madam Chair, I don't have any further questions.
No, that's fine. Okay. I have no further questions in the queue. Is just your last chance? No? Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. We will now move the recommendation, and that the Council receive the Palmerston North Airport Limited draft statement of intent for 2022-23 presented to the Finance and Audit Committee on 23rd of March 2022, and the Palmerston North Airport Limited be advised that Council support the proposed direction and implementation strategy. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Naylor. And are there any comments? I'd just like to make a comment. As David said, we're in unusual times, and I think we need to accept this this draft statement. We have no control over what's been happening with COVID, and when you look at 2020 and where we are in 2022, how you could have forecasted that in the last 2 years, I just don't know. So I think it's uncertain times, and it's just something that I know that the airport board will be looking at their operations, I would imagine, on a weekly basis. And I mean, even today at 11 o'clock, their destination will be known by whether we're staying in this traffic light system or not. So here's hoping. So we'll now, there's nobody else in the, sorry, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just briefly to comment around the plans ahead for the airport, and really wanted to congratulate the airport and note appreciation. Given that it has been very challenging times, it would have been quite easy to decide to pause or slow down or step back around the carbon side of things. But they've actually leaned in, and I think that deserves a real acknowledgement and congratulations for them jumping through to level 4 and getting on, because that's kind of the roll the sleeves up and actually do the work in terms of reducing emissions. And so really excited to see that they are not only sticking with it, but actually leaning into it, and just wanted to express thanks for that, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Councillor Harpeta.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I also wanted to congratulate the board and the management team for the efforts that they have done to date. I went on the escalator yesterday and thought the escalator was very good. So well done on the work that you have done and you're progressing to do in the constraints that you're working in and under. So I think that you are doing very well in these trying times, and congratulations. And we all are trying to work very hard. So well done on what you are doing, and we are behind you. So I fully support what you are doing going forward.
Thank you, Councillor. There's no one else in the queue, so we will now go to vote. So if everybody can, all those in favour, raise your hand. Anybody against? And any abstentions? So that is carried. Thank you. Right, we now go on to item number 8, which is the debt funding arrangement for the Palmerston North Airport Loan Facility Agreement, and that's presented by Steve Patterson, our Strategy Manager of Finance. So over to you, Steve, and that is on page 65.
Madam Chair, councillors, this follows on from a report that we presented in December when you approved in principle the philosophy of the council being involved as an intermediary, if you like, in borrowing from the local government funding agency to enable the airport to take advantage of the council's borrowing power and therefore get lower interest rates on their borrowing, which ultimately is of benefits to the council as a shareholder as well. So since that December meeting, I've been working closely with the airport staff to develop an agreement with the assistance of PricewaterhouseCoopers, who've been our independent, if you like, advisors on this, engaged by us both to develop something that we think is appropriate. So the agreement that we've developed is attached, and I'll comment on a couple of things about it in a moment. In relation to the recommendations, I just have mentioned to the staff, and they'll have it available for you, I'm hoping, a slight amendment to the third recommendation, which is just to cover off delegations to us to raise debt beyond the period of, once a statement of intent is adopted, as council's delegations to us to raise debt at the moment are based around the council's budget. And so I just want to make sure that we've got the appropriate delegations in place to raise the debt once this facility is in place. So when recommendation 3 comes up for you, there'll be a slight extension to that. In relation to the agreement itself, I had a feedback from a councillor who suggested we change a word "and" to "or," and I know that different people read it in different ways, but on balance, we're looking to change the wording on page 74 of the agenda in 2.1a, where it's got 50 million and. Some people read it one way, some people read it another, but I think on balance we'll change that word to be "or." So thank you for the councillor drawing that to my attention. And so we'll propose to just change that. So in your recommendation, when you're adopting it, just be aware that we're changing that word to "or." So that's, I think, all I need to say at the moment, and respond to any questions.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Steve, I have a question. Around the, you've noted that there's a complexity around the arrangement of the loan with that 97.5% difference, you know, with
yes.
So do you see that being an issue, or perhaps you might like to explain
Yes.
what that means?
Each time the City Council borrows money from the local government funding agency, we get in cash 97.5% of the money, and the rest becomes an investment that the council makes back in the local government funding agency. It's all part of the way the local government funding agency was developed in order to, and it protects them by ensuring that their equity continues to rise commensurate with the level of borrowings that they have out there. So so we've thought about that, been round and round in circles a few times and thinking about how best to handle it. But in the end, we've tried to make it simple, and we believe we can borrow the money in a way which means that we can overcome that and still keep it simple. So I doubt that we'll need to change the agreement in order to do that. We've got it in place, and I've talked closely with the local funding agency about how we'll do that, and we're happy that it's all going to work.
Okay, good. Thank you, Steve. And I have a question for Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I've got a couple of questions, but I guess, Steve, my first question is, I mean, surely the intention is that this loan money is repaid and that at some point the airport goes back to being a non-recourse borrower. And so just what is the plan around when the money that the council is advancing to the airport will be repaid? What's the timing? What are the conditions precedent for that to be able to happen?
Well, as we've developed the facility agreement at the moment, it's intended to be for 10 years, but then rolled so that it continues to have 10-year tenure. There's some really, I think, is dependent upon the airport company's own strategy about borrowing. And so our intention is that would be, that we would facilitate them borrowing in accordance with what they believe is their appropriate strategy for term, for the way in which they plan repayment and the like. And I guess each year through the statement of intent, we'll be happy or not happy about the way in which the debt levels are progressing and be challenging, I suppose, the statement of intent in terms of our confidence that those loans and any projected further additional loans are handled. So I would expect that the airport company would always have a reasonably significant debt component of their funding, but just the plan for repayment, we haven't discussed that in any detail at the moment, and I would expect that will be dependent upon what sums are ultimately borrowed and how the business tracks going forward.
Okay. Perhaps getting at that question then in another way, could the airport today go out and put a $50 million 10-year borrowing facility in place? And if it couldn't do that on an acceptable arrangement today, at what point in the future would it be able to do that, do you think? What would need to happen?
Well, at the moment, their statement of intent is drafted in a way which makes, as they've discussed with us, a number of assumptions about volumes, about resulting revenue streams and the like. And my expectation is that when they're committing to CapEx and therefore borrowings, that as a board and as the management of the company, they're having to make those calls about how things are tracking and their level of confidence about that and whether they can afford to proceed with the capital that's planned or put a halt to it at any point, as they have done in the past. So I think it's like always, they're in the past deciding when they borrow through the bank, and they do the same in borrowing through the council. The same tests are really having to apply. And they have to be confident as the board that they're capable of being able to fund whatever capital development. And we, in accepting their statement of intents, have to be confident as well that we're accepting that their underlying assumptions and the like are sound.
No, look, and I'm comfortable with that. I guess I'm really just testing, is there another option at this point for the council, or is this arrangement the currently valid feasible option?
I think for the airport company and for the council, using the council's borrowing strength through the LGFA is the single best option. And in reality, I would doubt that the airport company would be capable of borrowing as much as 50 million, certainly not today, but even into the future without some significant backing from the council itself in some way.
Okay. And then, Steve, you know, a question around your own debt analysis. Just how have you gone about that? I mean, have you stress tested the balance sheet to the point where an event of review occurs, and you know, just how much headroom and flexibility is there on that balance sheet? How have you gone about assessing the creditworthiness and the risk that ratepayers are taking on by advancing this money?
Well, I guess in reality what I've done at the moment is I've relied heavily on the airport board's own projections of where they see themselves in the future, and of course there are significant uncertainties about that at the moment. But I've even with this borrowing, they still would have debt to equity ratios and the like that are well within what we consider to be reasonable boundaries. And so I've gained the confidence really that the board's been able to perform, the companies have been able to perform in the past in a way that has given us confidence about the way in which they stress test their own commitment to capital, and I guess there's no absolute certainties, and this sum of money is pretty significant, 50 million. There's no doubt about that for the company, and I acknowledge that. But I've not really got any particular way of gaining any greater confidence, if you like, about their ability than the figures that they've been able to put in front of us based on the assumptions that they've made, which they themselves acknowledge at the minute have a level of uncertainty about them.
Okay. All right, I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Steve.
Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Steve. Couple questions. One is just to understand in aggregate, the terms and conditions that are imposed on council by LGFA. We're effectively handing all of those same obligations through to the airport.
In the council's obligations to the LGFA are driven by some ratios, if you like. Well, we have to go through the appropriate processes to borrow the money, and that's procedural type stuff, and so we know that. We've got systems in place to be able to handle that and give certificates and the like, that we've done things that are all in accordance with the law, in accordance with the requirements. So that's the council taking on that responsibility. In terms of then on lending that money to the airport company, to an extent, the airport company doesn't have any the airport company itself won't have any relationship with the LGFA. It's entirely the council that has that relationship. So our agreement then between the two is entirely driven by this facility agreement. And what we have done in the facility agreement is to make sure that that the company will be paying the council's underlying costs that it incurs in terms of interest on the debt, plus a margin that we think is appropriate, well, based on the advice we've had from Pricewaterhouse about how the company would be rated if it were to be a rated entity, and also to cover a little bit of the administrative cost that the council would have, and potentially any tax that the council would pay, income tax that the council would pay on the margin. So those things are all taken into account in assessing that level of margin. And so in broad terms, they are covering off the requirements. And of course, at the end of a term for a particular borrowing, there would be a debt repayment or a debt refinancing arrangement that we were to enter into, which would protect the council from any problems at that time.
Thanks, Steve. And so ultimately, the airport company would pay back the 97.5% as well as the 2.5%?
The airport company would pay us back whatever we handed them in cash.
So who pays the 2.5% then?
We invest the 2.5 back in the LGFA, and they pay us that back. The LGFA pay us that back when the end of the loan.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Are there any further questions? No. I have got a question around the just to confirm, Steve. The 50 million, that doesn't impact any of the council's borrowing, does it?
You're right. That's one of the key aspects of our discussions with the LGFA, just how that would be treated, and we certainly would be not keen for that to impact. So I have an assurance from the LGFA that that they would net off the sums that we on-lent to the company, and so it would have no net effect on the council's borrowing. There's one tiny caveat to that, and that is that it has to be always seen that the airport company is capable of servicing and repaying that on lending that we're on lending to them. So if at any point, for whatever reason, it became obvious that the airport company wasn't capable of doing that, then the LGFA would be reconsidering their way in which they treated that netting off that we were doing. Okay. So, yeah.
And just a further question. If the airport company significantly deviates from their SOI, what have we got in place to be able to, like, how do we get notified? What basically is the process? So say just they decided to spend 10 million on something that wasn't in the SOI. How do we get protection from that happening?
Yes. At the moment, we wish to be able to give the airport company sufficient flexibility to be able to change their priorities within any given year and respond to opportunities and the like. And so the airport company particularly, that's one aspect of the relationship that is potentially of a concern to them. They don't wish it to be the case, and I agree with them, that the council is so heavily involved in this relationship that we're having an influence on what priorities they have. But having said that, their statement of intent is giving us general direction about the nature of the type of investments that they're looking to make in any particular year. And if they were significantly looking to do something that was outside of that scope, they would need, in the end, to be coming back to us to seek an amendment to the SOI, and there is provision in the law for that to happen. But it would have to be quite a significant amendment for them to do that. We've managed it in the past to say, obviously, as they're talking at the moment in terms of some of those opportunities within the subdivision, if they have an opportunity that comes along that sort of still they're able to accomplish within the overall envelope of CapEx, and to develop an appropriate sort of lease back arrangement with somebody and get that development going, we would they wouldn't normally be coming to us to seek the approval to do that.
No, and in that particular case, I wouldn't expect them to, because it's in the realms of their vision and everything else. So
yes. So, but if they were heading, there was something that was completely outside of the scope or the vision of what the SOI was proposing, then that would trigger the need to come back and talk to us for an amendment to the SOI.
Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you, Steve. Okay, we have no further questions. So thank you, Steve. So we'll put up the 3 recommendations on the screen, and I'll read them from the screen because they have changed. Okay, so our first recommendation is that the loan facility agreement attached that would enable the council to borrow sums from the local government funding agency and on-lend accounts, the Palmerston North Airport Limited, in the form of a fixed rate unsecured debt be approved. And 2, that the Chief Executive be authorised to approve amendments to the agreement if required to address the way in which local government funding agency borrow notes are treated between the parties or as a consequence of annual reviews. 3, that the Chief Executive be authorised to enter transactions contemplated by the loan agreement of amounts not exceeding $10 million in advance of the approval of the final statement of intent each year, and subsequently transactions not exceeding the maximum term debt for each year as outlined in the adopted statement of intent. So I'm happy to move those recommendations. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Naylor. So do anybody wish to comment? Oh, sorry, Mr. Armstrong, you were in the queue first, so I'll let you comment first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So where I've got to on this is clearly there's a very clear statement of intent. Council are supportive of the strategy, and we've clearly got a very capable board and management team who are managing the business very, very well. So we should have a good deal of confidence. My sense of it is that in order to execute the statement of intent, there needs to be certainty around the ability to fund the investments. So in that regard, I'm very, very supportive. But also in mind, I'm recognising that in moving away from non-recourse borrowings, we're actually taking that risk onto the council's balance sheet. One might argue that in reality that perhaps was the situation anyway because the council wouldn't walk away, but the simple fact of the matter is we now no longer have that choice. I can see that we're being compensated for that additional risk in the premium that Price Waterhouse have determined is appropriate. What I would say, though, is at some point in time it would be preferable, in my mind, to be able to have the choice to have this money repaid. And so I'd encourage the board of the airport to be cognizant of that and be thinking and be clear around when that prospect might arise and what would need to happen to support that. And I'd also say that in terms of the way the business thinks about this debt, it shouldn't be thinking about it in any different way than from if it was being provided by a third-party financier. So this is not an easy out, and so that financial management, balance sheet management, maintaining financial covenants, ensuring there's significant financial flexibility in the balance sheet have all got to remain paramount considerations. But my position on this is I support the direction of travel. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Armstrong. And I too support the recommendations. I know that $50 million is quite significant, but unfortunately in the development world it's not huge sums. But if we want our airport to go forward, we need to provide the finance to go forward. I don't see it being any less risk by doing it this way than the airport going through the banks and borrowing the money. At the end of the day, we as councillors should be monitoring the SOI and making sure their investments are appropriate. So I don't see that risk being, us taking on more risk. We had the risk there, and we would have to still make sure that whether the airport borrowed it from the banks, that as the councillor, the only shareholder in the airport, we would have to monitor and make sure that the SOI and what they were doing was up to speed. So I don't see it any differently, and we will be monitoring this going forward as they borrow in their blocks, because they're not going to go out tomorrow and borrow $50 million. They'll be borrowing in blocks, So we'll monitor it, as I say, as we usually do. Are there any further comments? Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And look, I concur with your comments and also Mr. Armstrong's. Look, I support this. And why would we be doing it? Well, we're using, as the officer said, we're using the borrowing power of council. Yes, there are some risks, but as you've just alluded to, there's plenty of mitigations and safety nets involved. They have a strong balance sheet too, but the real key for us, and let's remember, we're 100% owner of the airport company, and it's a key strategic asset for us. Is the saving on those interest costs. You are right, Madam Chair, there's no difference from them borrowing really from the commercial world, the banks. But we have a lot of reporting with them. We have a strong SOI. We've got a good board and management in place. But also it does fit really strategically with one of the city's major strategic goals, which is around transportation, logistics and distribution. And the airport are a key node in that. So we've got to enable them to be able to progress and develop. And you're right, the $50 million in the bigger scheme of infrastructure, unfortunately, is not a huge amount of money in today's world. But like Mr. Armstrong, I would like to see it look to be paid back at a suitable time. And also, we're getting a cut on the risk that we're taking as well. So I strongly advise you to support it. It enables the airport to really move forward on its master planning. Thank you.
Thank you. There's no further people in the queue, so we'll now go to vote. So all those in favour, raise your hand. Anyone against? Councillor Michelard, are you voting? Or is your screen frozen? I'm not sure. Okay, so anybody abstaining? Okay, so that is carried. So I'll just check with the administrators that they've got this before we move on. Thank you. And we'll now break for morning tea. So it's 10:33, so 15 minutes. We'll come back at 10:50. So we'll come back at 10 to 11. Thank you. Okay, everybody, we're back to being on live. So we have a quorum. So we're now moving on to item 9. Oh, just before I move on to item 9, we just reiterating we will adjourn for lunch at 12 o'clock, and if finance and performance is not finished, we will do the briefing at 1 o'clock and come back after the briefing. So we now move on to item number 9, which is on page 89, and Steve Patterson, you're up again.
Yes, Madam Chair and councillors. Each year at this time we have a look at the fees and charges for the following year. And so this report's in a similar form to what we've had in recent years. I'd like to make a comment or two about each one of them just very briefly. I'm conscious of time, but I want to do that for you just to highlight where there are changes. In terms of the overall picture, as you're aware, the process for approving fees and charges varies depending on the nature of the particular fee and charge. Some of them are ones that have particular statutory requirements about consultation and the like. And so the first two that we have up there, the trade waste ones and the planning and miscellaneous, those ones that do require a period of public consultation. The consultation materials included in the report to show you what we will issue in relation to those. In relation to the trade waste, the figures there are driven by formulas that are in the bylaw. And so there's not really a lot of choice about that in a sense, except for the fixed fee to do with compliance monitoring. And here last year there was an agreement that we would stage the proposed increase over a couple of years, and that particular fee is not a very significant part of the overall bill that's charged to those trade waste users anyway. So that's a 2-year transition for that fee. In relation to planning and the miscellaneous charges, there's a proposal here to increase most of the charges by approximately 6% to cover significantly increasing costs in this area. One of the things that we always face when we're talking about these particular schedules and planning is the use of the term fixed charges, and just to remind ourselves what that means. Normally you'd expect the fixed charge to say, well, that's the charge full stop, but in this case it's got a slightly different legal meaning. The fixed charge is used as a basis for saying to someone that any charges that are made above that fixed charge level are additional charges, and they give people some particular rights in the law about challenging the charge. So the reality is, for each of those types of services that are provided, the actual charge is based on an hourly rate or other costs that are incurred and passed on to them, and they're charged a deposit that's commensurate with that. The level of the fixed charge that we have there, in 1 or 2 cases, they're quite big numbers, and they've been worked out on the basis of what the normal level of charge is for that type of work at the moment. And some of those notified consent type charges that are perhaps in the $80,000 category, there's not many of those, but the experience is that they're at least of the order, and I think there's a proposal there to increase that from 80 to 85,000, if my memory serves me correctly, then that is commensurate with the normal level of charge for that type of activity. So that's the basis for those types of things. If we think about the building activity, there's nothing material changed there. We're just proposing a 4% increase on those charges. Likewise with the health charges that follow that, and the animal control charges as well. For all 3 of those, we're just proposing no structural change to the fees, a 4% change to them. In relation to the burial and cremation fees, we've got a report there about those that the staff involved in that area have prepared for me, but no change is proposed for a variety of reasons, and they're outlined in that report. So those fees and charges remain as they are. Service connection fees for the waters activities. We made some structural changes to the way for those fees last year for 21-22, and what we're proposing is that they be just increased by to recognise increasing costs by a figure of 5%, rounded, just to keep those rounded numbers there. In the resource recovery or waste management area, we made a number of changes for the current year, 21-22. So there's no proposed, well, there's only one minor proposed change in that area for this year, and it's in relation to a new service that was introduced for this year, and that's to do with tyre recycling. And based on the experience to date with that, the staff are recommending that we structure those fees slightly differently, and you'll see those are outlined in that appendix. In relation to sports fields, we've got a general 4% increase that we're proposing to those charges, and an addition of one new charge to do with the skating rink at Memorial Park, and the reasons for that are outlined in the report. In terms of the backflow preventer charges, there was a structural change to all of those charges there for 21-22. That seems to be working fine in terms of the form, but there's a proposed increase to cover increased costs, an increase of 5% proposed for those. Similarly, for the corridor access fees, there was a new structure put in place for the current year, which of course is with the new things that have only been going a relatively few months so far, so there's no proposal to change those except for a rounded sort of roughly 5% increase for those fees. Make a comment about one other type of fees and charges where there's no proposal for change, and that's in relation to parking. Last year, as you're aware, we had significant proposals for change in parking encapsulated in this March report, and that rolled on for a few months until the council made some decisions about a variety of aspects of that. Some of those proposals have been in place now only just for a relatively few months, and the whole environment's been, I suppose, impacted by COVID to a degree in terms of parking. So at the moment, we're not proposing any change at all to the charges for parking. But just in relation to two aspects of that, though, one of the things where there was a resolution last year was in relation to the gold card application form, where there was a proposal to increase that from $10 to $20, but that proposal was subject to further consultation. We never, because of all the other things that were going on with parking during that period, we didn't end up going out and consulting about that particular proposed increase from $10 to $20, and so for the moment it's still $10. We're not proposing, well, I'm not proposing at the moment to change that, and we'll address that again in the future in terms of that proposed change. Likewise, there was inherent in the proposals that came forward for parking last year a suggestion that was embraced by the council in principle, and that was that there would be an annual indexation of the annual parking fees, but there was no particular proposal to the council about how they would be indexed or what would be the criteria for doing that. And so at the moment, we've made no suggestion, or we're suggesting the charges remain the same, I guess, is the way of putting it for the moment. If there were to be an indexed change, my feeling is it would be relatively small, and we need to be conscious of what are practical levels of increase for parking in terms of, for those people who still use coin and the like. So for the moment, although an underlying philosophy of some sort of indexation of those charges is still appropriate and sensible, for this year, for those variety of reasons, we're not suggesting any change. So, Madam Chair, that's my comments, and if there are any questions, I'll respond to those. And I have a number of staff online. Hopefully, if I need to refer to them, I'll do so. We'll call on them if we do.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. Steve, my first question is around the parking. So for next time, completely understand about the parking charges remaining the same. But if we wish to index next year, what is the appropriate process that we go through council so that we're not in a position that we haven't done the policy change, or do we have to put it on a work schedule to get this done, or what do we need?
I think we'll just keep track of it, that it is an issue. As part of this report, we would be making a proposal to you about what the indexation was going to be. And my feeling is that it's a type of charge that even if it is indexed in some way, the council itself will be wanting to approve the particular fee each year.
Yes.
So we would bring it up if there was a proposed change in an index type way. We'd bring it up as part of this report next year.
Okay, so could perhaps Cameron, our Chief Financial Officer, perhaps Cameron, would you be comfortable if we put this on as a work schedule item so that we have this ticked off before we get into this particular meeting, you know, this particular agenda item, so that we know it's the policy's already ticked off?
Yeah, it can be included as part of the work schedule to ensure that it doesn't get missed.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, now first up for questions, the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Steve. I'm looking at page 141 of the agenda under recycling car and truck tyres, 3.2. So taking the logic taking the explanation as to why the parking charges haven't been reviewed, because they were done about 6-ish months ago. I'm wondering why there's proposed increase in charges since we only opened tyre recycling up to the public on the 1st of March through media releases.
Councillor, to be honest, I personally wasn't aware that it was only just as recently as 1st of March that we did that. But the staff involved have made this recommendation because of the nature of the particular, they've learned more, I guess, about the charging regime, the costs we're incurring, and they're trying to match more particularly the type of costs that we incur in passing those on in terms of the structure. So but if there is someone online, I think they may be able to give us a better answer than what I can give.
I think Bryce had his hand up, Steve.
Okay, thank you, Bryce, if you could answer that.
Good morning, councillors. Acting Group Manager Resource Recovery, Bryce Hosking. Pretty correct. This is actually reflecting the actual cost to us of the arrangement that we've struck with the Northland group that we essentially are sending tyres to. So basically this added increase is being proposed to reflect that additional cost that we have incurred from the $5 lifting it to $7.
Okay. Thank you, Bryce.
So a follow-up, Bryce, is the proposed charges then, does that reflect covering the cost to council, or is that just sort of a step closer to that?
No, that will cover our cost to make it neutral.
So there's a statement there that says it's understood that the proposed charges are significantly lower than any market alternative. Is there any further insight into that statement there? Because $2, going from $5 to $7, for example, still doesn't meet the criteria for significant.
If you were to drop a tyre off at one of the landfills, for instance, you're paying $35 for a tyre. So even at $7, it is considerably more.
Okay, so this is not comparable to tyre recycling. It's around tyre disposal.
Correct.
Okay. Can I have an understanding from somebody in the comms team about the risks associated with an increase a couple of months after we have publicly promoted the cost associated with the tyre recycling, in the same vein that we're not considering parking charges because that was as recent as 6 months ago. I understand the cost side of things. I'm wondering about the comms side of things.
Is there anybody wants to put their hand up for that one? So I'll just go into the chat to see if there's anything.
Don't all rush.
No, hang on.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
Well,
Cheryl's here.
Yeah.
Oh,
perhaps
okay,
Madam
Cheryl.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Can I?
Cheryl.
Yeah, thanks. I see Donna's on the line. Can I ask Donna, or maybe we can actually get a message to Liv to come back on this particular matter?
Okay, we'll come back to this question when we've got somebody. So, Deputy Mayor, have you got any other questions?
No, at the moment my questions are all around that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So just let me know when somebody's available, please. Now we have Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And apologies, Steve, I just missed the first part of your presentation. So if you've already addressed this, I do apologise. But on page 103, under trade waste charges 2.2, the compliance monitoring conditional consents has gone from $135 per sampling and analysis to $237.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, is that correct?
Yes, I did briefly cover that, Councillor. The decision last year was that the increase would be over a period of 2 years, quite a significant increase to $237 from something that was down more like $35, if I recall, something in that sort of order the previous year. And so it was agreed that it will be a 2-year stepped increase of that charge. And what I'm advised is that that particular part of that charge itself is part of a component of the overall charges. That's a very small component of the overall charge that's made to the trade waste users. So in relative terms, although it looks quite a big increase, it's not in relation to the total bill they get.
Yeah, thank you. And then my other question is around the animal control increase. Not so much the actual percentage increase as the fact that the percentage that's being paid by users, if we want to put it that way, has crept up from 90% to 92%. And I wondered why that was, given that the range is 80 to 100 and the last few years it's been below 90. Why is it creeping up?
I haven't looked really closely, but my gut feeling is there's a couple of reasons. One is that we're expecting to incur significant costs shortly to increase with the building of the new. I was going to say, I better not say what I was going to say about it. The new pound.
The animal shelter.
Yes, the animal shelter. That's going to add really significantly to the costs of this whole activity, and so I'd expect that in time, not in reasonably short order, that will move back down again in proportionate terms. The other is, I think that the staff have done a really good job in terms of the level of registration and in their interaction with the dog-owning community at the moment, and so there's quite a lot of good engagement there, and I suspect that we've probably got a slightly higher proportion of revenue from registration process and the dealing with the preferred owner dogs in the way that that's happening than what we might have achieved in the past. So it just crept a fraction because of that, but I think that the costs as they're increasing means that we need to keep a bit of a handle on that and progressively move those charges up just a fraction in recognition of the fact that there's big increases coming to the costs for the shelter.
Well, thank you for the explanation. I'll have some comment later. Thank you.
Okay. We now have Donna and Olivia online. So, Deputy Mayor, could you repeat your question for them, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would love to. So I'm looking at page 141 under the recycling car and truck tyres. So Bryce has explained the rationale in terms of the proposed charge increase being that it covers the costs of council. What my question is really around is the comms side of things, because we have obviously put out a media release on the 1st of March with the prices and encouraging people to utilise that recycling opportunity, and then to look at increasing it so soon when the rationale given for, or part of the rationale given for the parking charges was that it was reviewed roughly 6 months ago, maybe a bit longer, and so we're sort of leaving that for this year. So I'm trying to understand why we're applying that thinking to one and not the other, and particularly something as new as recycling car tyres is a new offering to our community, and we've only just promoted it. So I'm thinking about the comms side of things is where my question centres.
The comms for this would be the same as how we are going to comms the general fees and charges, potential changes that would be part of the consultation. I think it's safe to say that the tyre recycling has been very successful. We had a marketing budget that we haven't even spent, because just doing a few radio interviews and things talking about the tyres I think it got 128 tyres in 10 days. I think the public understand that the tyres are going to Auckland, and that, other inflationary measures and things like that, petrol prices and things, we have a reason to explain why there has been that change. But I'm comfortable from a comms perspective that if we explain the change and why we need to increase the price, that the public will understand and probably have their say during the consultation as well.
Okay, thanks. That answers it.
Okay, thank you, Olivia. Much appreciated.
Madam Chair, just can I mention there's reference there to consultation. There won't be consultation on this particular charge. It's not part of the process. The council will adopt it as recommended from here. So this charge would take effect from 1 July. So it's a few months yet before it would take effect.
So on that, without consultation, we can make sure that we obviously publicise that increase in fee ahead of time. We've got posters and things at our recycling centres. We can update them with that new information and what the new fee will be ahead of time. Same with the website, social media, all of our normal tactics on that front.
Okay, thank you. Now we have Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Steve, for introducing the report. Questions around the trade waste side of things. If I understood your comment correctly at the beginning, the price structure is driven out of the bylaw?
Yes, that's correct.
Thanks, and that's the 2015 bylaw?
The one that's currently operative, yes. It's very much based on volumes and costs that relate to the 2 preceding years, calendar years, and those then flow into the calculations that work out these figures. And so they can vary quite significantly from year to year, depending upon the flows and the costs.
Understood. As I understand it from our council website and comms around that, the new bylaw is due for adoption either this month or next. And I just wanted to understand your views around the appropriateness of calculating fees for next financial year under an old bylaw, given that we are now weeks away from a new bylaw that will actually be the operational and effective bylaw during financial year 23.
Yes. My understanding is that the details of the fees and charges and the calculations are the same in the new bylaw as the old one. And so I haven't personally checked that, but that's what I've been advised by the staff who handle the bylaw side of it. I'm sure that my understanding is as well in terms of bylaws, if you set a charge under a regime, then that will continue until it's changed pursuant to the new bylaw. So I don't see any risks there myself, but I will double check that after this meeting just to make sure.
Thank you. Further to understand, and it might be something more from the Three Waters team or infrastructure team, is the rationale that's given there. I had understood, and perhaps I have this wrong, so it'd be good to get it clarified. I had understood that the pricing structure there was to also help incentivize on-site treatment rather than passing through all the BOD and suspended solids and everything into our system. And just wanted to understand, because the rationale that's given in the paper speaks only to cost recovery and doesn't really speak to encouraging trade waste treatment on site.
Perhaps I'll respond first, but then others with more direct knowledge will respond. But the whole reason for having trade waste charges is to try to encourage people to better treat the stuff before it ends up in the council system, I guess, and to charge the polluter pays if they don't. So in the past, there have been quite a number of entities that I'm aware of where the nature of their polluted material has the level of the charge, I guess, or the nature of the charge has been one that's been sufficient to encourage them to do significant investment in enhancing what ends up in the council system. But maybe there is someone else who can give a more technical response than me about that.
Is there someone? Okay, thank you, Sarah. Sarah Sinclair.
Through the chair, I was just discussing with Mike. I think Steve's covered that quite well. We do have some fairly big players who have the incentive to do their own on-site waste treatment, and that is clearly a big driver for us.
Thank you both. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dennison, question on the sports fields, is it?
I love it. Thank you, Madam Chair. No, I've hit that over the years pretty hard, and I'm happy to give some space to that. Mine are actually on the planning services this time, and one is probably some of the miscellaneous services for starters on page 114 of our order paper. Requesting a street number change, getting up over $400. When I compare that to, it's almost 2 hours of a planning officer's time. I'm just wanting to know the rationale. Are we just putting up all the charges just percent on percent? Because does it really take 2 hours of a planning officer's time to consider a number change request?
My understanding is that in broad terms we have applied a general percentage increase, but there may be, but in some particular cases there's reasons for some things changing slightly differently to that. I'm not sure whether there is one of the planners online who can respond to that. Well, let's just double check for us in a moment.
And while they're doing that, maybe I've got another similar one where I'm just kind of diving deeper into other charges, which is on 116 under vehicle crossings, that an inspection for an existing vehicle crossing is only $225 proposed, but yet an inspection of a new vehicle crossing is $416. And so again, if we're charging it out at officers' time and the skill of the inspection, why is that so different for that inspection?
Have we got somebody online, or we'll re-ask that question and come back to it?
I guess I'll save some comments around it. I like the response, but
I see we have a couple of people online capable of responding, I think.
Okay, thank you. We'll pass the question to them. So, Councillor Dennison, would you just repeat the question for those come online, please? You're on mute. Yep.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions really around the increases going up each year and questioning around the street number on page 114. Why are we getting up over $400 for that request when that equals equivalent almost to 2 hours of planning officer time for a simple street number change, which I thought I'd question just why is it getting so high? And the other one was around vehicle crossings. Why is it $225 proposed to inspect the existing vehicle crossing, and to inspect a new vehicle crossing, it's $416, when I would have thought that that would have taken about as much time to do those two inspections? So open for a response.
I'm assuming Kerry Lee's online that can respond. Is Kerry Lee, are you proposing to respond?
Simon Murray here. I've just come online. With regards, I can help a little bit with the street numbering. It's not actually a planning officer role. It's done by someone in our land admin team. So we might have to come back to you with what's involved exactly. My understanding, though, is that when a street numbering request is made, there's a number of parts of council that need to feed into that. So there's quite a bit of coordination involved. And then if it is approved, then there's a number of databases to update. So there's a little bit of work involved there, but I don't know exactly, but we can come back to you on the time it takes for a street numbering request. On the other matter with vehicle crossings, I'm not sure. That'll be someone in the infrastructure team that handles that.
Through the chair,
on
behalf of Simon, but through the chair on behalf of the infrastructure team, I don't have the details with me, but my assumption will be that because something is new, it probably has to be checked that it complies with more things. So I'll find the information on that and get back to you, Councillor.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, councillors, are there any further questions?
Sorry, through you, Madam Chair. I see in the chat box that Kathy Dever-Todd has responded, and she has said that a new vehicle inspection requires more inspections, whereas an existing requires only one.
Okay, thank you, Cameron. Okay, councillors, we'll now go to the recommendations, which are on page 89. Now, I don't plan to read all these out. There's 12 recommendations. Does anybody want to separate these before I move them? Is everybody happy to take them? Okay, Councillor Dennison?
Yes, thank you. I was going to separate. I'm just not fully supportive with the answers that I've got around just ongoing increases year on year for.
We're not in comment yet.
Okay. Well, I would like separation. Can I please have the building, the planning and miscellaneous, which is 3 and 4 separated, please?
Okay. Is there anybody else? Okay, I'm happy to move all 12. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Johnson. And we will deal with items 3 and 4 first. So, Councillor Dennison, I'll let you comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What I've having some observations of is just the rationale of just increasing year on year charges. I can accept the staffing charges for our personnel being charged out per hour, because I understand the the pressures on that sector and the cost of passing on to recognise those increase the payroll in that space. But however, there's aspects of it where I get uncomfortable charging just a percentage increase year on year to think that it costs $400 just for a request to change a street number, as an example. And so I'm going to oppose any increases overall in the space. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just had some comments around the animal control fees in motion 6, and also the rationale and answers to questions that we had. So I understand and support the fact that we've agreed that the user charges percentage for animal control is a relatively high one. But I don't support the percentage recovery creeping up year on year with the rationale that we're building a new animal shelter, so dog owners have to pay an ever higher proportion of those costs. So at the moment, dog license registrations are paying 90% of the costs, and next year we'll go up to 92%. The new animal shelter is not just for dogs. That's the first thing to say. It will be containing plenty of other animals as well. And I believe in the past we've had a variety of things in there, ranging from turkeys to sheep to goats, etc. The upgrade that we're doing in the animal shelter is necessary because of the increasing welfare standards coming down through MPI. And there's a public good element of the animal shelter, which is accounted for in the fact that we don't expect dog owners to pay 100% of the costs. And so I just do resist this kind of creep that we're getting of, oh, well, we're building a new animal shelter, so dog owners have to pay an ever-increasing percentage of the costs of animal control. I do think we need to remember animal control is about more than just dogs. Dog owners already pay 90%, and with these increases we'll be paying 92% of the costs. And the public good element and the fact that other animals are also impounded needs to be borne in mind. So I won't be supporting the rationale of, well, we need to increase the percentage that dog owners pay because we're building a new animal shelter, if that's going to appear again. And whilst I'm prepared to support the increases at this stage, because I think a 4% increase in fees is reasonable and reflects probably inflationary costs, I do think we just also need to keep our eyes on the percentage recovery for each area. Thank you. Councillor Beattie, you're on mute.
Sorry. Steve, did you, you've got your hand up. Did I miss you for some explanation?
Yeah,
I know we're in comment.
Yes, I realise you're in comments, Councillor. I was just going to, if I might, respond momentarily to a comment made by Councillor Johnson, who I think might have misinterpreted what I said. I might not have said it clearly enough. I wasn't suggesting that the dog owners should pay more because of the power of the new shelter. I was thinking that as the costs start to incur for the new shelter into next year, those costs will increase, and that will naturally mean the ratepayers are going to be paying more and more of the share, and so the creep, if you like, I don't think will occur quite so much. I realise it's gone up a little bit this year in terms of the way the budget's been prepared, but my belief is that that will come down quite significantly as the costs of the animal shelter start to hit, and we're certainly not targeting trying to get more from from the registered dog owners in order to fund the shelter. That's not what I was meaning.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Right, we now move on to Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to clarify whether we're only dealing with 3 and 4 matters and then looking to wider comment. My comments are
no, we'll go for wider comments. I've let Councillor Dennison have his say on 3 and 4, so I'm open to all comment.
Great, thank you. Briefly to comment around where we're at with parking fees, and appreciate the additional commentary from the officer laying out the situation. Did want to express a level of disappointment that we're at the point that we are. For those of you that recall, a year ago, we gave quite clear direction through a council resolution around annual indexation. And it's disappointing to be at this stage then and not have really the information or tools to hand to make a rational decision around that. And I do feel there's been a lapse in terms of perhaps a report that could have come to help provide some context around what a level of annual indexation might have been that would be appropriate, rather than leaving us in a position now of not really having a good evidence base from which to make any particular decision around that. I do hope and thank certainly the chair for working to get that onto the work schedule for the coming year. I'm very keen that we do not enter the sort of situation that we were in prior to last year, where simply there had been no adjustment over a number of years, which had really led to a significant decline in the proportion of revenue and the proportion of the costs of the city that were being borne from that particular source of revenue, and was very keen on the approach that we actually see it set on an evidence based for an annual indexation, so that it isn't a political football every single time it comes around, but it is simply part of how we actually set up our fees and structures. And clearly, as we can see today, the rule is generally that most fees and structures do see an annual revisiting that is commensurate with the costs and expectations around that area. So overall, I am disappointed in terms of where things got to today, in terms of not having that information to hand to really make a decision from an elected member point of view, but do want to express appreciation to the chair for ensuring that it is on the work schedule so that we can address it properly going into the year ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dennison, oh no, are you wanting to speak?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just because you're taking comments wider than 3 and 4, which I specifically thought we were talking on, my wider comments now, if that's okay?
Yes, certainly.
Yep. I concur with what Councillor Johnson's got concerns about with the dog fees and what's proposed. I do note that that's going out for public notification, but even then, I think the fees from 1st of August, the jump from what the 1st of July figures are for registrations, I'm not comfortable with, and it does seem to me that there's a larger percentage being shared for the building of the dog shelter or the animal shelter. The other question, I can't but help just raise comment on the sports fees and charges, and this is just comment, it's not a question, but making the comment, I guess, with an open question around on a page 146 when Touch have per Coronation Pavilion a fee of $2,077 when we have lease agreements with other facilities for only a few $100s that are in sport and recreational settings, that I wonder that we don't look at forming some sort of lease agreement for those type of sporting facilities rather than charging fees of over $2,000. That seems like an anomaly to me, that that's getting up that high when, like as I mentioned, other users are only paying, you know, relatively hundreds of dollars for an annual lease. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I just make a couple of comments. I'm pleased to see that we are increasing the fees in line with CPI and everything, so it doesn't get out of kilter, so we don't have these big jumps. I'm comfortable at this stage with the 4% for the animal control. There has been significant increase in costs with staffing costs and additional levels of service in that area, and also with fuel costs. Just a note, as you raised it, Councillor Dennison, in previous conversations, a lot of those fees to do with like touch football is because it's a lot more higher maintenance for those grounds, whereas where we're just leasing for a year to some of those other organisations, it's just a straight out lease and they look after the land. So there's quite significant costs in maintaining some of those sports fields. So I'm comfortable overall with the...
Madam Chair, just a clarification, is I accept the sports field charges, but there was actually an inclusion of the Coronation Pavilion, which is a building, and that's what I was making my comments referencing to the building.
I'm sorry, you mentioned touch in particular, so I'll stick to my comments. And so anyway, so as I say, I'm supporting the increases, and I'll be pleased to see the parking on the work schedule so that we can get that sorted out in a proper fashion. So we'll now go to vote. So we're now voting just on 3 and 4. So we'll go with the raise of hands. So all those in favour, raise your hand. And anyone against? So that's 2, 3 against. Any abstentions? No, so that's carried. I'll just check with the administrators that they're okay with that. Yep, they are. So that is carried. And now we'll do the remaining recommendations except 3 and 4. So all those in favour, please raise your hand. Anybody against? And any abstentions? So I'll just check with the administrator so that... Thank you very much. So that is carried. So we now are moving on to item number 10, which is variations to operating budget, and that's presented by our Chief Financial Officer, Cameron Mackay. So over to you, Cameron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to cover off a few points on this one, I will largely take the report as read, but this is in response to the recommendation from the 6-month report to bring back to you some further detail around our operating variations. What we have decided, what we have done is we've basically provided another layer of detail at the activity level. If you recall, in the 6-month report, at an operating level, it sits up at the group of activity level, so we've dropped down a level in the structure to provide to you the variances at an activity level. We've also provided in here, after discussion with the Chair and Deputy Chair of the Committee, an expression of interest in operating programs, particularly the larger ones. So we've provided a table in the report to outline progress on those operating programs and a bit of a status update on those. Also included within this report, and I just want to touch on it briefly, the second recommendations. If you recall back in the Committee of Council discussion, one of the items I raised was a reduction in renewal funding required if we were to bring forward $1 million of Council's planned fleet and vehicle replacement program. Basically, why we did that was to in anticipation, we'll bring this to you, which we are doing now, and basically to try and reduce the impact on next year's annual budget, knowing that we're in an underspend situation this year. Also, just to add to that, and speaking with the officers on this, the cost for vehicles, particularly truck replacements, are increasing because the cost of steel in production of vehicles is increasing. So we're actually starting to see that come through in pricing. So there is an advantage of ordering these replacements early to avoid further price escalations. But that is included in this report for your consideration as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Cameron. Are there any questions, councillors? Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Cameron. Just a question for clarification. In the written part of your report, you comment on system difficulties in terms of reporting. Is that what? But I wasn't clear just what the problem actually is. I mean, I'm assuming that your chart of accounts enables you to report against activity and to identify the net cost of an activity. So could you just elaborate a little further what the challenge is, please?
Okay, I will do my best to answer that question. So basically, as the council will be aware, we use the ozone system, which is quite a old system for us and has some flexibility issues, and is one of the reasons behind the one of the major digital upgrades that we currently have planned. But just on that, it's reporting at an activity level like we have here is achievable through that system. It's when we try to get down to more granular level and bringing it out in a way that's understandable takes a bit of time and effort on officers' part to do so. So that's why we have landed at this activity level as opposed to going further, deeper into the detail. That becomes more problematic in a timely manner.
Okay, thank you, Cameron. I might explore it another date. I had one other question, which is just in relation to some of the reporting in your appendix. And in particular, there's a section, as I'm trying to find it online, towards the end of the report, which sets out activity and budget change. And basically that little box at the end, if I read that properly, it just seems to be reallocations of expenditure within a particular activity. And so I'm a little unsure, given that the delegation allows the CEO to move between net operating budgets for activities. I would have thought, if my interpretation of this table is correct, that this is somewhat redundant, but perhaps you'd just care to comment and clarify that for me?
Yeah, yes, certainly. But basically what we have here, and I'm taking this as the table that is contained in section 6 of the report on page 161. This was also attached to each of our quarterly reports, which is where we have had variations approved by the Chief Executive and approved by Council. So if I just touch on, say, one of the examples in there where rightfully suggest that there is a reallocation, but just to point out, for example, the first one, that's a reallocation between wastewater and water, which then triggers the financial delegations policy because it's between activities. So,
oh, thank you. Okay.
so that is why we're reporting on this.
Okay. And that's the case for all of those items. They're across activities.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, and thanks, Cameron, for the report. It's really useful. I'm just wanting to get an understanding about when there is a change to an operational expense, either a program that we have, and if the amount is to increase, or if there is to be an activity or a program to be progressed that hasn't perhaps been approved through the annual budget or long-term plan process. Where is the threshold in terms of when elected members would expect for that to be reported or highlighted to us in some way?
Okay, so, hopefully I've understood the question correctly here. Where elected members will have reports back to you, particularly in an operating sense, the financial delegations policy applies. So if there is a requirement to increase the budget of an activity to fund such a new expenditure, and it is greater than 10% of that activity budget, then the Chief Executive will report that through the quarterly report process in terms of exceeding that that statement on the financial delegations. Now, if there is a change that is greater than 30%, then that has to come to council for approval as per the delegations manual. Does that answer your question, councillor?
Yeah, partially. So where in the quarterly report do we see that? Because I haven't seen that being reported. So
the table that you see that is contained in section 6, which is page 161, does outline those variations, and that is what was also reported in the 6-month report.
Okay, and just in terms of when, I mean, through the annual budget process, there was some discussion around some programs where there was requests for additional budget, perhaps, and the way that those activities had occurred this year, you know, for example, the marketing budget, officers' response had been that the additional activity had been enabled through the use of the of the surplus. So when the surplus is to be utilised for either increasing a budget or activity that's not specifically identified through an operating program, is that just completely within the delegation of officers, or when would we expect that to come back, sort of for that, you know, for elected members to be made aware of that?
So if for example, in the example you've given, the marketing space, if for example they are under budget within that activity, but they may actually identify there are some needs for initiatives to do with marketing, as you have expressed, they are able to spend their operating budget as put forward in the long-term and annual plan processes. Where they are going to exceed their operating budget as per the delegation manual limits, they must be reported back through council through the quarterly reporting process.
Okay, so we would expect then to see that perhaps if there's an addition, you know, some of the surplus that's been used for marketing, for example, would we expect to see that somewhere in the quarterly reporting, that identified in some way?
Sorry, if that surplus has come from other activities to fund additional items within marketing that wasn't already within their budget, then yes. If the surplus is within the marketing activity, then the financial delegation state it's only when that activity exceeds its budget by 10% or the 30% threshold.
Okay, thank you. And just one further question in the report on page 157, in that table, governance and active citizenship section has got a slight, well, an overspend of about 400,000, and the comment is that some of the direction setting work is ahead of schedule. What's the direction setting work that's being done that's ahead of schedule?
I'm not able to answer that level of detail. I'm not sure if someone else online is able to do that.
Is there anyone else online? No, we'll have to come back to that, Councillor.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so next up we have oh, hang on, is that gone? Just one moment. Councillor Barrett, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Cameron, for the report. Questions relate to the second recommendation. Can you give us some insight into what types of vehicles, what class of vehicles are being contemplated for the $1 million investment, and specifically whether those would be electric vehicles or not?
I'm not sure if Kathy David-Todd is online. If she isn't, what I can say is I know that
it appears
some of the trucks. She's online. There we go. Let her answer that.
Good morning, councillors. Kathy David-Todd, Group Manager of Parks and Logistics. The vehicles are pretty evenly split amongst small utility vehicles and trucks, one of them being the significant amount of money on a rubbish truck that keeps breaking down. Yes, that where possible with the technology, we are moving to hybrid vehicles. Councillors, also the vehicles that we're replacing are extremely old at the moment, so the vehicles we would expect to be bringing in are more fuel efficient than those we've had at the moment.
Thanks, Kathy. Can I just follow up then in terms of understanding the net impact on fuel efficiency that we might expect out of this investment? Appreciate you might not have the exact numbers to hand, but could that be shared with council at a future date, and would it need a resolution to see that information shared?
No, it wouldn't require a resolution. I can't comment on whether we would be able to provide that information other than the fuel consumption, probably. There are a number of other efficiency factors in consideration there, but we could have a look at some of the metrics through our vehicle monitoring system.
Thank you. And which report would we expect that to filter back through then?
That's something that we could do at any one of our normal reporting cycles. I'll take that offline. I can just come back to you on that one.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Is David Murphy online?
Yes, I am, Susan.
Oh,
yep.
David, would you be able to answer Councillor Naylor's question? I'll get her to. Yeah.
I was just, sorry, Susan. I was just having a look at that, and I'll probably need to connect with Cheryl, because I think the bulk of the direction setting undertaken by strategic planning sits in city growth and city shaping budget. So I just need to work out whether that work that's ahead of budget, what that relates to, whether it's the sort of governance activity in Cheryl's area or the direction setting in my area.
Okay, thank you. If you could get back to us with an explanation, that'd be great. Okay, are there any further questions, councillors? There being none, I'm happy to move the report. Do I have a seconder of the two recommendations? I better read them out. Recommendation 1, that council receive the memorandum titled Variations to Operating Budget presented to the Finance and Audit Committee on 23rd of March 2022, and that council note and approve bringing forward capital expenditure of $1 million from 2022 to 23 into 21-22 for program 1879 council's plant and vehicle replacements. So I've moved that, and Councillor Naylor has seconded that. Does anybody want to comment I'd just like to thank the team, Cameron, for that report. That's excellent. There was a question, did we want this report every month? No, we don't. We just want it as part of the 6 month or the quarterly reporting as this information into the quarterly report. Thank you. So, but much appreciate the time and effort presenting this, and apart from a couple of questions still to be answered, it's the information that we wanted. So I appreciate that. And it also makes sense to me to bring that capital expenditure forward to get those vehicles in place. And also out there, I hear that vehicles are going to be increasing in costs and more difficult to get. So I think the sooner that we spend the money and we have the surplus, it's common sense. Councillor Naylor, you wish to speak?
Thank you. Yes, I also appreciate this report, and I've found it really useful, and certainly I think it'll be useful understanding for us to have going forward and help inform some of the ongoing conversations that we will have in terms of perhaps that delegations review and ongoing reporting in the quarterly report. I think my perspective is that I do think that in the current season that we do need some better visibility and reporting of some of the changes in operating expenditure. I think primarily because we're in an environment where there is a surplus, and I do think from my perspective, and perhaps others, may have an expectation that if surplus is to be used for something, that should be visible to elected members. Certainly, I think in terms of the delegations, some of the scope, I think, and obviously I look forward to that review, but I think there is a little bit of, some of our delegations is open to interpretation in terms of whether we're looking at specific programs or whether we're looking at activity. So I'm hoping that through that delegations review that might be able to be clarified. And so I think it's really important going forward that elected members have a clear understanding about what is reported and what is expected to be reported and what is expected to be brought to council in terms of authorising any additional expenditure. So yeah, but thank you for the report, and I found it very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's all the comments. So we'll now, Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, reiterating to an extent Councillor Naylor's comments, I'd just like to note that, and I know that we're going to be reviewing the delegations manual in the near term, and it hasn't been reviewed, as best I can see, since 2017. And just reflecting a little bit on discussions at this meeting and at the previous meeting, we've got a relatively new management team. We haven't reviewed the delegations manual now for some years, and it really is a cornerstone document, and it links directly to the 10-year plan and to budgets and to the internal control framework for the council. So I think it's an excellent opportunity to really test everybody around the table's understanding of those key definitions in the delegation of authority and how they flow through to activities and how program expenditure fits across that, and how the specified sum works, and how the thresholds of 10% for reporting and 30% work, and an opportunity to test those things and to work through examples so that going forward there is absolute clarity between the council and the management team and staff around what their capacity to act and commit is. And I think that would be a very, very positive thing. So I'm really looking forward to the upcoming review process around the delegated authorities, and I think it's just a really fundamental part of basic corporate hygiene that we need to get right. So just a few comments.
Thank you, Mr. Armstrong. They're very sensible comments. Right, we'll now move on to vote. So all those in favour, raise your hand. Anybody against? Any abstentions? So I'm assuming that's carried when we get on our screen. Thank you, Natalia. So that is carried. So, councillors, we will now break for lunch, and we will be back at 1 o'clock for our workshop, and then finance and performance will resume after our workshop. Do we have an indication?